Scheerer's administrator for the Center to Study Race, Politics, and Culture. And I wanted to just say a couple of words about the program that CSRPC has started as of last spring. It's called CRES Talks, and it presents, it's a speaker series that is designed to bring to campus scholars and writers whose work is currently being taught at the university. This series invites current comparative race and ethnic studies majors and minors and other interested students, undergraduates and graduate students, and the general public to join us for in-depth conversations and to listen to scholars and artists and in some cases activists talk about their work. The idea is to bring topics that are discussed within the confines of the classroom into a more open forum. This autumn, Agnes Lugo-Ortiz has generally allowed us to co-host and publicize parts of Eduardo Lalo's visit to campus as part of the CRES Talk series, and this is one of those occasions. Her novel, Mr. Lalo's novel, is being taught in Agnes's Caribbean literature course. The novel Simone, or Simone, which received the prestigious Rómulo Gallegos Prize last year and has just been translated and published by the University of Chicago Press, translated into English, and we're delighted to have Mr. Lalo here. First, I'm going to introduce Agnes Lugo-Ortiz. She is a specialist in 19th century Latin American literature and in 19th and 20th century Caribbean cultural history. Her work focuses on questions concerning the relationships between cultural production and the formation of modern socio-political identities. She is the author of numerous essays that address interconnections between queer sexualities, gender, and anti-colonial politics in 20th century Puerto Rico. Since 1994, she has been on the advisory board of the Recovering the U.S. Hispanic Literary Project, and she is also currently the coordinator of the Humanities Division's project towards a New American Studies. Please welcome first Agnes.
Thank you, Sarah. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome you all this afternoon to the Center for the Study of Race, Politics, and Culture for a conversation with the Puerto Rican writer Eduardo Lalo, and to officially welcome Eduardo Lalo to the University of Chicago. He has already had a rather long day since early this morning, visiting classes and seminars, meeting with students, walking around campus. And we are grateful to him for being with us now at this late hour, enduring and defying exhaustion, to speak publicly about his most recent novel, Simone. This event of today has been made possible by the generous support of a group of units inside and outside of our university, and I would like to mention them here. First, by the program in Comparative Race and Ethnicity and the Center for the Study of Race, Politics, and Culture, which are the main sponsors and coordinators of this event, but also by the Center for Latin American Studies, the Karla Scherer Center for the Study of American Cultures, the program in Hispanic and Luso-Brazilian Studies in the Department of Romance Languages and Literatures, and most especially to the Department of Spanish and Portuguese at Northwestern University, who so generously collaborated with us in this effort, and I want to acknowledge our colleagues from Northwestern. Hopefully more of these collaborations will be taking place in the near future. It is quite possible that despite having written more than 10 books, and that despite having received the distinguished Rómulo Gallegos Prize for Literature in 2003, one of the most important literary awards in Hispanic literature for his novel Simone, Eduardo Lalo may still need some introduction, especially to an US American audience. This, I hope, will not be the case very soon, due to a large extent to the recent publication of the English translation of Simone by the University of Chicago Press, a feat that we are partly celebrating here this afternoon. How did an unknown yet prolific writer from an invisible country, to use one of the main conceptual tropes that guides his writing, ended up calling the attention of a major university press of the United States, such as ours? Years before, I must stress, winning such a visible international literary award as the Rómulo Gallegos? The answer to this question is a tale of causalities and randomness. 3 years ago, in the year 2012, completely out of the blue, I received an email from 2 members of the University of Chicago Press. One was an energetic Venezuelan, a young and restless lawyer who used to work at the copyright department of the press. And the other one was a sensitive, curious, and extremely thoughtful editor. They wanted to meet with me to discuss the possibility of launching some sort of initiative to publish contemporary Latin American novels in translation. That meeting took place and was exhilarating. They wanted to know how did the most recent contemporary Latin American narrative look like, how does that narrative look like? And they were particularly eager to learn about the current status of the bonds of singular intimacy between literature and politics that has defined the fictional narrative of the continent way before the mid-20th century explosion of what is known as the Latin American boom. Who are the new important living writers, they ask? Who deserves to be known and translated in the United States? The conversation was a long one, Chicago style, and the names of authors stretching from La Patagonia to the Rio Bravo flowed torrentially like the river that has been made to divide the 2 Americas. At the time, I did not know Eduardo Lalo personally, but was familiar with many of his works. He had already published several collections of short story with small presses in San Juan. En el Burger King de la calle San Francisco, in the Burger King of San Francisco Street, with Ediciones Astrolabio, 1986. Ciudades e Islas, with Publicaciones Yukiyu, 1995. La Isla Silente, which is a recopilation of 3 of his earlier books, with Isla Negra in 2002. But most strikingly, he had already also published 2 books that had produced a sort of disturbance in the Puerto Rican literary scenario, not just for the power of the writing, its somber beauty, lacking the populist stridency that has characterized so much of recent Puerto Rican literature, and for its philosophical depth, so at odds with the facile ruminations about identity that had become consubstantial to many Puerto Rican literary endeavors. They produce these texts a disturbance as well, and particularly for the way in which those books dislocated established taxonomies concerning literary genres, define its classificatory mechanisms. I cannot think of any other Puerto Rican text previous to Los Pies de San Juan, The Feet of San Juan, published by the Centro de Investigación y Política Pública de la Fundación Biblioteca Rafael Hernández Colón in 2002, and Donde, Where, published by Editorial Tal Cual in 2005. I can't think before this text of any previous text in which textuality and visuality are so ostensibly displayed in a full simulacra of materiality. The simulation of the archaic typewriter print for the words, in the case of fragmentary kind of like passages, just kind of like with the print as if it were just the print of a typewriter. And the granulation of the image in the photographs that accompany this text, as if calling the hand to touch and feel the texture. Text and images, text and texture. Those were not books. They were artifacts in which mind, vision, and touch demanded to be amalgamated in one single and vertiginous sensorial experience, and where thinking was staged in non-certain terms as a bodily matter. This is a practice, as I must add, to which he returned again in 2010 in an extraordinary book called El Deseo del Lápiz. And let me show it to you. I'm going to pass it around, actually. This book, El Deseo del Lápiz, from the year 2010, that is, again, it's a kind of like artifact that documents the dismantling of one of the major jails in Puerto Rico, known as El Oso Blanco. Lalo went to the jail when it was just like being dismantled and documented the graffitis and the writings on the walls. And then the text is accompanied by his own textual reflection on the on the visual writing that the imprisoned people left in the jail. I will pass it around so that you can see it, because it's that kind of like artifactness that I think characterizes some of the most interesting texts by Lalo. So again, as I said, he returned to this kind of like practice of a kind of sensorial experience, as thinking as a bodily matter, in El Deseo del Lápiz, and with different, less material inflections in another important book, Los Países Invisibles, the Invisible Countries, published by Tal Cual in the year 2008. So I haven't read all this stuff, but I didn't know the writer. So I couldn't help thinking, who in the world is this writer? Who is this artist? I thought to myself at the time. Thus, when the Venezuelan lawyer, Inerte Horst, we lost to the University of Chicago of Texas Press, really an embarrassment to this institution, and the insightful editor, Margaret Ignor La Barbera, who's sitting here in front of us, when they asked me who did I think would be a good candidate for the initiative that they so eagerly wanted to launch, there were no doubt in my mind that at the top of that list needed to be the name of Eduardo Lalo. Now, experimental text from an unknown writer is not something established presses are ready to embrace without a certain set of guarantees, especially in this time of budgetary cuts and meager economic resources. And in this case, for sure, there were not guarantees at all yet. Thankfully, though, amidst the whirlpool of formal and material, essayistic and visual experimentation in which Lalo was engaged, he also decided to publish a novel, his first novel, a text that unequivocally could be classified within the parameters of the book market as a novel. That novel was called La Inutilidad, Uselessness, I think. Ediciones Callejón, published by Ediciones Callejón in 2005. In that novel, Lalo had fictionally rehearsed many of the problematics that had appeared in his hybrid essays and that were to resurface later on his novel Simone. Central among them were the condition of the writer in an invisible country, invisibility understood as a mechanism of power by which human existence is denied, but also despair, desesperanza, and uselessness, inutilidad, and understood as non-instrumentality and the disavowal of transcendence, but taken, despair, uselessness, not as figures of negation, but as the names of the sites from which existence and estar, not hacer, and human creativity could spring. That was the novel that the University of Chicago Press was first considering for publication when Simone won the Rómulo Gallegos. You could very well imagine that proposing the translation of an author whose work has been published under the rubric of small unknown presses with the names such as Astrolabio, Yukiyu, Isla Negra, Yukiyu is a serious name. Taino, the name of the Taino god of goodness. But again, Astrolabio, Yukiyu, Isla Negra, Callejón, and a mimetic Tal Cual, that is not the same thing as the famous French publisher Tel Quel, like Bart and Cristeva, etc. A meager echo of Tel Quel, may very well have raised more than an eyebrow. The challenges of publishing in the invisible countries. In any case, these were not the big, prestigious publishing houses of the Hispanic world, most of them based in Spain. By Spain I mean Barcelona and Madrid, and Mexico, which by Mexico I mean the Ciudad de Mexico. And more often than not, these places ruled by an inner circle and exquisite, pompous literary mafias. These books were not published in the Fondo de Cultura Económica, or Siglo XXI, or Era, or Mondadori. Neither were they published in Sex Barral or Anagrama, not even in Tusquets. These were Yukiyu, Astrolabio, Isla Negra, Callejón, and Tal Cual. But long live the perceptive readers, the true and curious lovers of literature. Inés and Margaret read La Inutilidad, and indeed loved it, regardless of where it has been published. Thus, they move with conviction to make the case to the higher authorities in the press. However, why publish such an unknown writer that even lacks a literary agent? How serious this man could truly be? But then the unthinkable happened. In the midst of the deliberations, as I said, the Rómulo Gallegos Prize. Perfect. And it was not anymore about if we were publishing Lalo, but how soon we can secure the translation rights for Simone, and when we were publishing La Inutilidad, which I should mention is forthcoming next year, as I understand, in time for the release of the movie version of Simone, as I understand, that is currently under production. So, in one of its dimensions, this is the story that partly explains how we all got here today. Randomness and causalities. A scholar, Caribbeanist from an invisible country, me, who happened to teach in a very visible university, being incidentally consulted about relevant Latin American literature by an eager Venezuelan lawyer concerned about having more Latin American literature published by the University of Chicago Press, and an editor, Margaret, I just lost my thing, where is it? So, boom, boom, boom. Who was uncompromising in her judgment of a good text, wherever it came from. But above all, and this is the non-random part of the equation, we all are being here today to the writer-artists who have lived literature and art against all odds, inutilidades, desesperanzas, y ninguneos, as a profession of bodily faith, and who has already given us an extraordinary oeuvre, the totality of which, from his hybrid texts to his essays, from his short stories to his poems, deserve to be translated fully into English. Join me in welcoming Eduardo Lalo.
Hi, I'm very glad to be here. I'll do something that I haven't done for a while, that's speaking English in public, so bear with me. I am very thankful for those words by Agnes, and finally I meet you in person. Very nice to be here. It's extremely hard for an author to present his own novel. This is the third time that I say that today in two languages. Because if, as I said before, if I were to present my novel, I would read every word of it, because that's the presentation, that's what I wanted to say. It's very hard to be one's own reader. So I would, instead of interpreting or analyzing what Simone is, whatever it is, I would prefer to talk a little bit about the things that I wanted to do or to explore when I was writing that novel. And later, to speak with you, to have a dialogue with you that will be, I guess, more interesting than what I have to say. When I began writing Simone, I started just writing it just after I finished the other novel that now the University of Chicago Press is in the process of translating, Uselessness. And I wrote the whole text, the first version, from the first page to the last page, in a period maybe of 3 months or so. But what happened was that several books got in the way of those hybrid texts that Agnes was speaking about, came by, Donde, the Several Lapis, and others. And in between them, I continued working with Simone. But I began to fear that I was going to be a work that I wouldn't be able to finish. Because I think for a writer, each book has a time. And that's why in the history of literature there are so many important works that are unfinished, novels or essays or whatever. Think about Kafka. He wrote all his novels and didn't finish them. And in a way, that was the best ending for all of them. There are books that were written through the years and years back. Let's think about Pessoa. I guess the translation in English is the book of Disquiet, El libro del desasosiego. And with all difference between those and mine being stipulated, whatever Simone was as a manuscript, it has a time. And I wanted to save it, but I was realizing that the time was getting shorter and shorter because my interests and things that I wanted to do were going another way. So I finally tried to not think about other texts, other genres that I prefer, like the essay, the way that I practice it is not an academic or historical essay. It's a very free form. It says what originally the word says. It's an essay. It's a trial and error. You put things on paper to see how they work, and the only limit is what the page can hold. That's why in my essays there are pictures, there are drawings, there are photographs, there are many things, not only words and design. So I practically forced myself to finish Simone. And when I was doing that, I recall what were the motivations. And I think what I was trying to explore was doing a novel, doing a recognizable novel, where even if it is a novel, it would play with the limits of the genre. And I was going to tell a story that is a universal story of novels. Story of two people who get in love, a love story. There's nothing more quiche or more common than that. But what I have to try, what I wanted to try, is to try to retell that love story in a different way, in a way that is maybe not so new, but at least has a different flavor. And I wanted to combine that, or to do that I wanted to maybe try to combine that with the particular ambience, the particular environment that certain detective novels have. I am not a great reader of detective novels or police literature, but I have read a few and I like some of them. And I particularly like the peculiar paranoid characterization. There are that psychological paranoid quality that certain detective stories characters have. And in a way, I wanted to explore that literature, but in another completely different story. I had no interest whatsoever as a writer to deal with crime or policemen or detectives or CIA agents. That stuff, that's not my thing. I might enjoy once in a while reading about them, but that's not what I do. So I began, as always, in what I write. A phrase came one day, and that was the first line of Simone. As always, I don't know exactly what I am going to write, what genre I am writing. I write a few pages, maybe when I have 10, 15 pages, I have already a feeling what I am writing. This will be an essay, this essay will have some visual dimension, or it will be just an essay with no words, no images, or it would be a novel or a short story or whatever. Fairly quickly in Simone, so I knew that I was dealing with a novel, not any kind of novel. And that's why, especially in the first part, it doesn't seem novel, because it seems more like an essay in a way, more like a different type of narration. And as I told as I was telling some time today, I didn't know what the story of Simone was going to be. I was writing it at the same time as I was inventing it. For example, I remember somebody asked me, I don't remember one of you, what I was thinking about the Chinese community in Puerto Rico and all that. I was telling them, well, when I was writing those first 100 pages, I didn't know that the person writing the messages was Chinese. I was in the same position as the character. I was inventing. And at a moment, without any forethinking, let's say, I said, of course it has to be Chinese. And then all the other elements that form the story. So it's not that there exists a prearranged plan and then I sit down and I write. In the act of writing, the discovery, that's the adventure. No? There's where I discover the actual act of writing. Okay. Besides this, I was also very preoccupied with other things. For example, what's Puerto Rican literature? What's Caribbean literature? What's Latin American literature? On a very superficial level, that seems a very simple question that is answered by many books, many literary works, many critical works. But I am not so sure about that. I think that if you are in Latin America, there's a way of speaking about the continent in terms of culture, because Latin America is not a continent. In reality, the only place where they speak of 6 continents is the United States, because they want to separate North America from South America. But anywhere else in the world, it's just America. No, there's no frontier. It tells a lot about how the United States has seen itself, and that's another story. As a unique place, and a place that has like a privilege, royal privilege to change even geography, but that's not what we are talking about. But in terms of culture, what we speak of Latin America, if you do that in Spanish-speaking world, then you talk about America Latina y el Caribe. That's Latin America and the Caribbean. And that's very nice. It goes really well with an epoch of the times of political correctness. And in a way, it's very nice. It's inclusion. Let's say it's Latin America, meaning the continental countries of Latin America, sent from North America to the south, and then the Caribbean. But at the same time, it's a list, and it's a list done with a certain order. Nobody says the Caribbean and Latin America. That could be said perfectly because it doesn't change. A single letter or a single nuance of the sense that you are conveying, but it's never said like that. In a way, it's like there's a real, or more serious, more heavy Latin America, and then there's those islands somewhere in the Caribbean. under this there are many things that hide. It's very fitting that we are in the center of race, and remember the whole name. Because what's behind this, in many ways, is racism. Because somehow certain other parts of Latin America see themselves as an extension of European cultures and peoples, who yes, they live and conquer and are the heirs of a terrible genocide. There are some Indians left, but they are invisible, or they are somewhere. But we are now the new people, the new owners of the land. And there's a mention of that Europeanness in many ways. Whereas in the Caribbean, that's impossible to say with some degree of seriousness, because it's Africa and many other things. It's India, if you go to Trinidad or elsewhere. That's India too, and it's there's an Indian, meaning Native American, also component that it's more present than it's superficially thought most of the time, as well as people from Europe and elsewhere. So in this, it's problematic, at least that's what I would like to convey. And at the same time, because of what Latin American literature has become in the world, people have a notion of its nature, and its nature is mainly an extension of the works of what we call magical realism. I have always, since I was very young, had problems with that conception or that style or that current of Latin American literature, because I think it hides certain things. In a way, to put it in a certain kind of caricature, it says, well, we are poor, but we are, we are so happy, or we are so great, or we are so creative, or we are so, we live in misery, but we enjoy life like no one. And that's absurd for me. I think that there's sometimes an intention to hide the real life of, or the real human experience as it is lived in that area of the world. In the case of the Caribbean, it's even worse because of certain literary works of questionable quality. The main view that is conveyed of that literature in that region is either a Baroque style literature, very, in terms of words, very heavy, very without space, in the page. A lot of verbal experimentation and linguistic exploration. And in another level, more I guess the Baroque is more associated with the Cuban literature and more associated with the Puerto Rican literature, a literature that it's more determined by popular culture, popular language, popular uses of language, where there's a certain lightness and a certain use of humor, also a certain linguistic use of, let's say, a non-acceptable language in certain levels, certain environments. And that too I had a lot of problems reading and being a reader of those literatures, because I didn't see myself or the world that I lived those representations of reality. Not that they were completely, weird or that they came from elsewhere, but they were limited. And I think that in a way they were so they endured so much time because they were of easy access to foreign readers. They were readable outside of Latin America or the Caribbean. They are safe pictures for a foreign eye of those books. Nothing changes. You still leave your mental image of whatever you had or thought of those places, and you leave it intact. It's there. One of the ironies of publishing Simone, and that I appreciate greatly the courage of the editors of the University of Chicago Press, is that they go through all the committees of evaluation in France, Germany, but at the end they tell Simone it's not enough. Doesn't seem enough of the Caribbean, and that's okay in the sense that you can think whatever, what's the Caribbean? That's the problem. And I have always fought, I think all my work goes against this type of positions. Because I think, and I have experienced that personally, very early, that whenever I confront that, and it's every day, my human condition, it's being limited by the ideas of another person. The Puerto Rican people, or any other in the world, in any country, it has a heritage, and it has the heritage of all the tragedy, in the sense, the classical sense of the word, that can fall upon an individual. We are no less humans. Our despair or our pain or our suffering is no less than that of Oedipus or Anna Frank. To say that we have to speak or write or put palm trees or boundaries or whatever, speaks of speak or write or dance or all the arts, paint or photograph, what you consider that is us, it's an act of violence. An act of violence that is most of the time done without consciousness, because that's what we speak of invisibility. What invisibility is a form of domination, and why it is so effective is that most of the time it's done as a natural thing. You don't think. For an example that everyone will understand. Not so long ago, it would be said of women that they cannot do this, and that's natural. Nobody questioned that. And that's what limited the human condition of half of humanity to an idea. That was a way of invisibilizing and of dominating that half of the world, that half of human beings. And the same thing happens in many other groups, women, men, both. So I wanted to, as all my books, to write a novel that is also a form of thinking. It's also a form of practice of thought, as I believe that literature does. Not every, so I was studying a while ago, that doesn't mean that you go to a bookstore and what you see on the desk, on the tables, in the bookstore, it's literature that thinks. But there are certain traditions within what we call literature that do that. And that's the tradition where I think I want to be. And to do that, in that novel, without, also writing something that is extremely heavy and extremely bothersome to read. And it's a novel. And as a novel, it's a very light genre. It's a digest, probably, even lighter than theater, maybe. It's a thing that you read a novel mainly not to feel the passage of time. That's very powerful. That's why it has been has accompanied us for so long and will still do. But when you don't feel the passage of time, you can do that in a very stupid way, in a very idiotic way, or you can lose yourself within yourself and the world. And that's the literary experience. And to do that, or try to do that, not within the scope of the ideas that others have had of Caribbean, Latin America, Puerto Rico, etc., was, I think, one of my main goals. And that's why I'm very grateful when I see readers in different countries that have never visited my world, have no idea where I come from, and they have an appreciation of that work, because that work is universal, because it talks about human beings, not Caribbean human beings. We don't need the adjective. Maybe you remember that when the Vietnam War was going on, newspapers here in the United States said, well, there were so many people killed and so many Vietnamese human beings killed. That differentiation is terrible. It's another way to kill. It's a second way to kill. So if we can obviate, kind of obviate that second way of killing, you can read anything and make it of yourself. So in a way, that's one of some of the things that I had in mind when we if you want, we can start a dialogue. I'm not going to talk the whole hour and probably deteriorate your use of the English language.
The floor is open for questions.
Did you say oubliette in French? That's obliterate.
No, I didn't say oublier, I said obviate.
Obviate. Obviate.
Let me perhaps break the ice here. Addressing the last observation you made about kind of like a horizon of expectation that your work is read without gentilicios, without a sense of the particularity and of situationality. However, you simultaneously have said that what you're doing in your work is actually to be able to put in words a particularity, no? That is the Puerto Rican, I don't want to say identity because that's a word that is loaded with notions of essence and predeterminations often, but certainly Puerto Rican existence and the Puerto Rican condition. So I want just perhaps for you to talk a little bit about this, because it seems to be kind of on the one hand, there's an expectation of the universal.
Yeah, there's no contradiction there because one, let's say, first proposition, Puerto Ricans are human beings. If you say yes, then their experience could be extrapolated to, if it works literally, in terms of literary quality and tradition of literature, could be worthwhile or be appreciated by anyone. And as you know, in other works, I talk about the importance of seeing from the margins. Seeing the experience of invisibility opens great possibilities, because you work within in a region where you are freer and where you can think with more, let's say with less limitations, and great traditions that have a great historical presence are difficult to move. And so if you are somewhere else, as in countries such as Puerto Rico, you are seeing the world another way. In many ways, as I write about in Los Países Invisibles, the invisible countries, the experience of 20th century Puerto Rico was an experiment in what we call now globalization. But it was experimented when even the term or the strategies to combat it, or to at least to resist some of the consequences of globalization, didn't exist. So in a way, Puerto Rico is a lesson of the perils, of the dangers that we all face now, and at the same time of the strategies of resistance, because it's in a way it's a successful story. We have survived. We are full of injuries, and we are cut, and we are not well, but we survive. And it tells a lot about the resilience of a culture. You just have to think one or two things. Puerto Rico is the only country in Latin America that was conquered twice, not invaded. There are countries that have been invaded several times, but conquered. The first one that is shared by all Latin America. The second one is only ours. And we were conquered by the United States in 1898. It was a conquest. It was the invasion of Iraq, where you would have stayed indefinitely. And that is the present situation, political situation of Puerto Rico. It's a colony of the United States. That's a very bad word in American jurisprudence, because you were the 13 colonies. You went through a war of independence. So in American jurisprudence, that's called a non-incorporated territory. That's a territory that is not thought to be included in the Union. The march to the west of the United States was done through creating incorporated territories, and that is territories that were to become states. And just think about what it meant what that means in the 20th century. Because in the 20th century, not only the United States is the country that has dominated the world militarily, politically, scientifically, economically, but has also seduced the world. American popular culture is everywhere. Americanization is not a problem of Puerto Ricans. In many ways, we are the most resilient because we have suffered or have not suffered or have been influenced by it in a very direct way. And it's a problem of the Japanese, of the Chinese, of everyone. How you cope with that? You have the atom bomb. How would you conquer independence with pistols? The oldest political prisoner in the history of the Americas is a Puerto Rican that it's from Chicago, immigrated here, Oscar Lopez Rivera, 34 years in prison. There's a movement, international movement for years to be pardoned, for him to be pardoned. And that's globalization. You have no power over what you consume. What happens now in the United States, there's no industry because everything is done in China. Agriculture is menace because they're somewhere in Mexico they produce more cheaply. That's the history of Puerto Rico. And we are in ruin right now. With foreign debt that it's impossible to pay. But those are the consequences of a process of what we call normalization for most of the peoples of the world. And what happens when that happens? What happens culturally? What strategies you take? How a colony can produce great culture that's unique in the world. And in the case of Puerto Rico, as you know, in many arts, it's not generally appreciated as it should be. We have an enormous cultural productivity. You think about music, think about acting, actors and actresses. Benicio del Toro, it's Puerto Rico. Think about the plastic arts, the visual arts. And I hope that now literature will be seen more, or our literature will be more taken into account than before. Because when you see a book or whatever by Puerto Rican, it could be maybe other people's. It could be a person that lives somewhere in the Midwest of the United States. And you see in the biographical book that he is from there. You have much greater probability that you would leave there for the book or the film or the whatever. You wouldn't enter to see the exhibition. Because that's what's invisibility. You have a system of what it's images that say what you should take into account and what you shouldn't take into account. And that's a system of domination and oppression. And it is as if it is impossible for a person in the Midwest in some, wheat town or grain, some agricultural town, and somewhere, to think or create or do great music. That's terrible. That's one of the most violent acts that can be made. And it's one of the most general, I believe that condition of invisibility is the most common for humanity. Not all people live in New York or Paris or what, and even those people that live there. If you live in a certain neighborhood, you are invisible. Now, if you live from
Brooklyn. You have to live in Brooklyn.
yeah, well, that's it. And if you live 20 miles from here, you're nobody.
So, you've been talking a lot about the conditions of invisibility, partly from the experience of being Puerto Rican, vis-a-vis big or understood as more important cultures. But I was wondering, I think the first book that I read of yours was La Inmovilidad. I remember I was going home for the holidays and Agnes told me that I had to read you, and I thought, this woman wants me to read more, and I ignored her a bit. But then when I went to La Tertulia, there were people actually really angry about what you had written, so that just convinced me that I should read one of your books. And what was left was about La Inutilidad. And it just so happened that in La Inutilidad, there's this unfortunate character who comes to the University of Chicago, right? If I remember correctly?
I never read it, so
Okay.
please.
Well, in any case, I finished reading the text as I was coming back to Chicago, and I felt
You mean the poet at the end?
right, really aggravated with you because I felt, you know, in some way identified. But what shocked me was that so much of what I had heard about what you had written was so, in many ways, it had a tense tone. So there's also another sort of machinery of invisibility within our own culture, right? And I hope to hear you talk a little bit about that because that is also an issue, and that is also and it is an issue that exerts violence that sometimes is even more pernicious. I don't know if more, but it could be equally pernicious as the big culture that pushes down the little culture. Right?
What are you referring? What is invisibilized? What invisibilization are you referring to?
The invisibilization within our own. I think you might have pointed at that when you mentioned mafias, right? Regarding what comes out of our country, what is read, right? What is discussed, what is taught.
Within Latin America.
Yeah.
I think there are two separate things that have relations, of course. Here you have to maybe think about the small internal struggles of an artistic community or a literary community. All literary communities are small. There are not such thing as big, has been like that from Homer to today. And I think there are some particular struggles there. But there's also a public, a larger public. For example, that type of attacks or so I never found in the readership, the Puerto Rican readership as a whole. Within people that are within that community that want, in a way, it's a competition for attention, and that always creates problems. There are people that have certain positions in many aspects of life. I don't work for the Ministry of Tourism of Puerto Rico. What I represent of our country is whatever I want and what I see. I don't work for, I don't wish to be Mr. Congeniality either. I don't even believe that that's a function of the writer. I have to talk of, at least that's what I feel it's my responsibility to write about what is painful. And many people don't like pain. to be expressed, or they want to, just as in a family, secrets are not to be revealed. And there are people that hold that that's the position to maintain, and there are others who don't. And I tend to gravitate to the second position.
I have to say that I've been living here for close to 20 years. I moved from Puerto Rico, but I go back and forth like many of us do. And I've always been in touch with the literature production there. And I was very surprised because to me it wasn't until you were honored by these Gallegos that it was like you were famous. Suddenly, like a lot of people were talking about you, and your name broke away from those idealized writers that we had, like Eduardo Lalo, Rafael Sanchez, and all those. And so I think that you represent, in a way, a new generation of writers. And I was wondering if you've been approached by the Department of Education to bring your material to the students there, because there is this stronghold of a tradition within that department of having specific writers that are in the canon, like they're the ones who are approved, and whether there is space for newer voices to be inserted there too. So I would like to hear your perspective.
The short answer is no. The longer answer, it's make you a story. That's what I was told. The Academy of Language of Puerto Rico, the member of the Spanish language, has its principal site in Spain. Well, the academics of the academy supposedly had a meeting after I won the prize to decide, and they were not going even to write a letter of congratulations. I guess that's the first in history of humanity where you hold a meeting to say we are doing nothing. And I'm not sure that happened because I was not there, that's what somebody told me. But I would believe it easily. Whereas if a member of the academy would have received the prize, free bronze status by this time would be there in front of the academy. Literary, I would say, recognition. It's a thing that writers look for obvious reasons. You write to have readers, and you write to hold a very special communication that only happens when you read. Most of the time we read people that are dead. And when we do so, they are not dead. They are very much alive in our minds. And there's something that happens in that magical moment, that it's the moment that you read, that defies the physicality of life. Even if the author is alive, he's not there. Most of the time, you won't meet him. You won't even know how he you see a picture maybe, but besides that, you don't have any idea about him. And when you read, let's say that you are reading something with enjoyment and with appreciation, that not only that person, man or woman, is very much alive, but you are alive too. in a way of communicating. And it's probably the most intimate experience that we have. It's more intimate than the relationship that we hold with the people that we believe that we are intimate with. And that's why I think to read is not a thing of a time period. It's a way of being human. It's a way of being what we are. But literary recognition, it's a thing that you don't control. I could have written the same books. In fact, I was not going to even participate in that prize because I never participated in prizes. It was a friend that at the last moment just told me, no, go send the books. I didn't send them by myself even because I didn't even have the time for the publisher to send them because it wasn't the same week. To make the whole story, I come back to what is more important. When they made the package, well, first of all, I won't send them. When the next morning I was free from work, I said, well, let's go to the post office and mail it. Went there and they made a little package for Caracas. And when they told me how much it cost, I had this 10 seconds of hesitation. And they were probably the most significant in my life because it was $100. And I didn't have the $100. So I had to ask them, oh, do you have credit cards? And they really sent them because they had made already the package. So if I said no, they had to bring the package, and it was like very polite.
So it was a courtesy to the post office.
Yeah.
What a pleasure.
And not even that, when the first list of books was published, participants' mine didn't appear. So I said, I sent this, I paid $100, and still I'm not in the list. And so that it's a thing that you don't control. And you don't control literary recognition. It's impossible to be fabricated. And sometimes it happens like this. Randomness. That's Agnes was talking about. It's a randomness, but it's not like winning the lottery. It's not that type of randomness. You have to be in a position, having created work, that if that happens, it's like fire. You have to have something that ignites, cannot be soaked. If that happens, I have tried after it happened is to, as I say in Spanish, to write and say in public palabras llenas, full words, not full in the terms of full phrases, but words that are not void, and that there's thought in what I do, and that there's no compromise with the powers that be. I have been approached by literary agents that said no to everyone. In fact, two of the biggest. I still publish with a very good Argentinian publishing house, but it's a small fish in a pond of very big transnationals. I do that on purpose. It's part, I think, of an ethical position. And I think that it has not been an impediment or negativity for me. I'm here with you speaking about my work. Maybe I wouldn't be at the big hotel speaking about my work. It's, I don't know, rented by a publisher, but I don't care how to do that. I don't feel that that's the thing that I want to do. So,
Here's a question. A couple of questions.
I want to ask you about the inside jokes and the provincialisms. Well, one of the things that shocked me, scandalized me, and I'm not in the Puerto Rican Academy of Language, was I think the first 4 pages the narrator uses the word autobús for bus. And it takes me a moment to realize that the narrator is locating the character outside Puerto Rico. And that's a hint that it's outside Puerto Rico. But further in the book, finally there's the word guagua for bus. And throughout the book there's this intense play with local reference that only somebody who's missed the turn at a certain street or who's eaten at a certain bakery that the narrator describes would get. And other things which seem to me to be very aggressively in dialogue with Mexican, with the Mexican readership, the dialogue with Gabriel Said's Los Demasiados Libros and other things. So I guess my question is, if we're really after readers, how does your narrator balance the provincialisms with the wanting to be in dialogue with Simone or with Gabriel Said?
well, I don't see the problem at all. First of all, I think that there's a little misappreciation sometimes here, because it is as if a person in the Caribbean will only say guagua to say a bus, and that's not true. That's not a practice. I say autobús sometimes, I say guagua, and I guess most of the people, for example, if I see a big bus, like a really big bus, it's an autobús, or maybe I see an SUV, it's a guagua. Words are not, you wouldn't, again, I think also there's a problem, because you wouldn't look with that, I don't say you personally, because other people have said that type of comment, with that microscopic optic to, let's say, Spaniard saying somewhere, words travel in time. We say many things, and more in our times where you have just to turn on the television and go outside, and we'll hear 5 different Spanish accents, because you're seeing somewhere on TV that speaks with Mexican accent or Venezuelan or whatever. You go out and there are Puerto Ricans and Dominicans and Cubans and whatever. So words communicate all that time. At the same time, I don't see how that would impede me to talk about Simone or read anyone. In fact, if you go to a certain level of Puerto Rican intellectual people that are fluent in different languages, that have studied in Germany or France or States or in Latin America, as well as in Puerto Rico, where there are some former students of the University of Puerto Rico that know that the level of just to go to one of those bookstores, even if they are now, when our prices in very bad shape, you can find they are better than the bookstores. Well, the people come there to them from other countries, because there's a certain level, a certain intellectual level that, of course, is not the majority of the people, as it isn't anywhere, or that exists. So why not? Why in the world Simone could not be read in San Juan? If you go to La Tertulia, as you were mentioning, probably you'll find 5, 6 books there. And there are people, of course, that are, as in Patagonia or the Altiplano or in the desert or in the Amazonas, that even if their apparent surroundings are not more appropriate. They are people of culture, people whose life is determined by books and by certain traditions of literature, philosophy, poetry, art. And anywhere, I will tell you, anywhere, in any city in Latin America, you'd find always a guy that you say has never gone out of that country. And you say how you had accumulated this library. Because it's not that he has a big library, it's that he has a certain edition in probably mine. A certain edition of a newspaper, of a journal that was published somewhere, and that's incredible.
I think we have time for perhaps one more question and then we can have dinner. When the phone,
Yeah.
under control.
So yeah, I'd like to go back to this topic of literary recognition, publishing market, politics of literary scenes, especially in the scene towards the end of Simone, in which the three writers, three Puerto Rican and Spanish, discuss or rather argue about the periphery relations and the asymmetries between the publishing, the conditions for publishing, for selling, for getting prizes in Latin America, the Caribbean, and in Spain. And I don't want to ask you what your position is because I don't think it's the point and think it's necessary, but I would like to ask you how was the process of first creating the scene that talks about a subject that is so close to you, and how it was to revisit it or to rethink about it later, in other moments when talking about, we're talking today and after receiving the Gallegos Prize, what are the reverberations of this scene?
Well, it was a difficult decision. First of all, if I was to include that or not, because I think it's true, and that's what some people say, that if you cut that scene and do a transition, you could finish with a novel, and it's UChicago and where you end. That's the story. But I decided to include it because of several reasons. One of them is that I think that's the only way to understand the two writers. There's a particular tone in their psychology, let's say, in their positions. There's a tone in their pain that wouldn't be comprehensible if that scene was not included. Now, there's a lot there happening. And a lot that is, even if they talk and talk and talk, it's also the subtext of what is not said, what's happening there. It's a mixture of, in fact, they are almost ashamed. But it's not that they are ashamed of what they talk to the other writer like that. It's of their position, of their situation, which is not equal to others. I also have received a lot of heat. You say that, right? A lot of heat from many people for that scene. Probably that's just enough, from what I hear, for the novel not to be published in Spain for the next 10 generations. Seriously, that's apparently what has been according to my publisher in Argentina, it's a novel. That's okay. Someday we'll be published. That's how art works. You know, you're talking for the next generation at least. One has to be patient. In terms of what it means, I think it's just that. You know, there are certain reputations, even national reputations, that are built up more from a commercial standpoint. I believe, as one of the characters says to the Spanish writer, that the damage that the industrial publishing complex in Spain and elsewhere have done to literature. I was a jury of the last Rómulo Gallegos prize. We had to evaluate 162 novels. And that was small because before, for example, when I participated, there were more than 200. It's the same novel. You read the same novel, almost 9 of 10, it's the same novel. And the publishers, it's not a story. It's they look for a person, a new writer, a person from that country, of between this age and this age, preferably that that you put a photograph. It's interesting for the readership. It's what happened to music, what happened to film, what happened in a way to the visual arts, especially from the neo-expressionist onward, till recently. It's what's happened, it's what is happening already in literature. In American bookstores, from a long time ago, you see fiction, and then you see a smaller section, much smaller section, literary fiction. That's literature. The other is another thing, and it has been adopted. And in many ways, for aspiring writers or for writers, they want to be in fiction, because that's where the money and the fame and all that is. And that's okay if you want to do that. I only want to defend every time I can that other small or big or medium-sized, depends of times and other factors, sector where tradition survives, and survives with help, and where it can thrive on.
Thank you so much, Lalo, and we can just continue the conversation later. Thank you so much.
Yeah.